Good evening and welcome to the Dusty Feet. Looks like we got audio, we have video. Good evening. It's February 4th, right? And we're on another episode in our Matthew series. Before we get that, let's get this out of the way. If you find these videos beneficial, if you feel they would be of benefit to others, subscribe. And then if you click the bell icon, it's going to remind you that gets up. One of the things that I do like is if you find these beneficial, click the like button. If you don't, or there's something you have a problem with, click the don't like, and then tell me in the comments anything you have. Or if you don't, which a lot of people don't want to pop comments because they pop out to other people, then go ahead and just send me an email, bob@TheDustyFeet.com. We'll talk about it. It's no big deal. We again are in the Matthew series, Branches of the Vine, the homework series, because this was homework, right? We're not going to have a video. We'll have some slides because some of the things that he brought up in that show, in his episode, I've clipped some of the graphics out of it to pour it over into ours. So we do have some of those, but you're going to have watched that. So if you're watching this after the live and you haven't seen the video, hit pause, go into the link is in the description, watch the video, then come back and play. If you're live and you've missed it, and you're just going to have to deal with it and you go back and let's do it later. You're missing something if you're just taking my words out of this. The whole point is to listen to Mackie and listen to things that he shares. And then we could talk about it afterwards, which we're doing, okay? And there's something new I'm trying, and we'll tweak on this and play with this. This is what we have fun to do. But it's something where I kind of wanted to give us a focus, okay? So, and as every night on the Dusty Feet, this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation. Where belief understandings may be challenged, divine misunderstandings may exist, and traditional teachings might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and truth. So here we go tonight on the Dusty Feet. So we're on this Branches of the Vine homework series with Mackie, and I absolutely loved what he had to say. This was a good one, and it's interesting because he even mentions in this that this is one of those sometimes uncomfortable things to talk about because you're bringing up things that aren't traditionally talked about, and they kind of get pushed by the wayside, and yet they're important and they're going to stretch us some in the thinking, and you don't really think about it. Wait till we get to 3 where he gets really big into the onion peels back onto certain things, and I think we're just gonna dabble in that a bit tonight on this one, okay? And he wrote, and he mentions that this is not in the typical Christmas story. Our typical Christmas story has, Jesus getting born, and he's in a manger, and then some shepherds show up, and some angels are singing. We got little white things flying around with wings. We got a bright light, right? And that's our Christmas story, right? That's that traditional Christmas story. And yet the origins of Jesus are anything but typical, anything but routine, and one would say anything but smooth, okay? And he brings this out in a number of ways. Remember, he talks about this is the genesis of Jesus. This is This is the beginning. This is his foundational experiences. Think about what we talk about today, how critical the first 5 years of childhood development is in a life, and even the first 5-10 years. Okay? And then pause, look back and see, what were Jesus' first 5 years like? First 10 years like? Okay. We have an introduction here to those beginning years. There's a bunch that we don't know, but there's some things about it that we know. Okay. And Mary. Okay. So she has a roller coaster Jewish teenage bride, a young bride, and a young groom. Okay. We have no idea if they were in love or if this was a Fiddler on the Roof, matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match, find me a find, catch me a catch. And it ends up with Mary and Joseph. She's betrothed. She already has the plan for a husband. And one might say that God is probably fine with Joseph. That's part of the deal. But he comes to Mary and says, you're going to have a baby, and this baby is from me, and he is really important. Okay? And Mary is a bit taken back. Bit of a shock. Your betrothed bride, you get told that you're pregnant. This is back then. This is going to rock her world just to start. Just to start. Then she takes a trip. We don't know where the interaction with Joseph comes in. We don't know that, because we hear a story where Mary goes down and visits Elizabeth in Jerusalem. We know she goes to Jerusalem, and the story says, but that's because Zechariah, her husband, has his priestly duty. This is part of the reason, and some of the ways that you find out when this time frame was. Okay? And then you do math from here to figure out these kind of things. How do we know that? Because we were talking on our men's group the other night about genealogy and lineage tracking. And the Jewish people make the Mormons look like peewee baseball players. Okay? They have been tracking lineage and doing this for millennia. Okay? And so they track their families very well. So, and lots of things, priestly schedules, those kind of things were all things that they thought were important to track at the time. And it helps us in knowing when these things were coming around and when Jesus might have been born. Hint, hint, not December 25th, probably more around the time of Sukkot. It's worth some research to you to go look out when Sukkot was. It'd be interesting, because Sukkot happens every year. It's one of the feasts that God says, there's 7 feasts that he says, these are my times, my appointed times for you. This is one of them. Would make sense that he would have his son show up one of the feasts. Just saying. Anyways, so we don't know when to the setup, but then we don't know when Joseph finds out, but he finds out, I'm guessing, Bob, that Mary tells him. Joseph takes exception to this, but in a nice way, because he could have made this very public, very quick, very ugly. But they've already had this discussion because he's decided to divorce her and put her away quietly. Okay? He's going to be nice, okay, and make it a not public statement. These betrothals are very public. People know. Go watch Fiddler on the Roof. But people know, okay? And then when you back out, it's a big deal, okay? And he wants to do it with as low key as possible. So they've already had that discussion. So Mary is young, and then she's going to get married, and she finds out she's pregnant. Son of God, but that doesn't sink in. It's big, but she has no idea what this is going to become. She has no clue. She's elder teenager at best. Okay, she's in this deal. Then her husband finds out, right? Her betrothed finds out, and divorce is for even the betrothal. In other words, what most of us don't think divorce when we're engaged to our fiancés. Okay, different in that cultural context. You put this context in, and now it becomes even more important. Okay, and he says, "I'm going to divorce you." So now Mary's on I don't have a husband. Women don't have jobs like they do there. They're different culturalisms that are going on. This is a roller coaster deal. Okay. Then a messenger comes to Joseph in a dream and says, "Hey, you're fine. She's with mine. So take care of her. By the way, here's his name," right? And so you go, "Oh, okay." So he goes back and marries her. Okay. And I believe takes seriously his job past there. And there's other indications that we have in here with that. But this is a roller coaster. This is not an ideal way to start a marriage, much less the start of what we would think would be, this is quote unquote the savior of the world, right? And these things we have. So then in this time frame, whilst this is going on, we have Rome, and Rome is in a context of they are in their decline. This is the downside stage, which is where they start getting brutal back inside their own territory. Okay, there's one where they're growing and they're prospering, and the conquest is pushing out, and they're and then they start to implode. Okay, there's a lot going on, and then disruption and rebellion pops up at certain places. In this area, you have Jewish zealots, right, that are fighting Rome, that are actively fighting Rome. Simon the Zealot, we're going to see him later on. Yeah, yes. So that's grabbing part of the group, right? So it's a very tumultuous time. So walking down the street is probably not there's not a lot of good interaction between government and people at this point. Not a lot at all. Then they say, "Hey, we want taxes, and we're going to do it based on your home lineage. So we're going to make it uncomfortable for you. We want you to travel to your hometowns." Okay. And then we're going to do our accounting, figure out our people, bill from there. Okay. So he has to take Mary down. Okay. Now, what's interesting is, would he have left her or not? It doesn't say, like, that there was a discussion on this point. I think he's very protective of Mary at this point. There's multiple reasons to think that, but he's very, very protective of her at this time. So he takes her with him down to Bethlehem. It is a time where people are supposed to go down to Jerusalem anyways, but she's very pregnant, and you wouldn't think that you would arbitrarily bring a pregnant wife. Mackie brings it up. You're away from your midwives, you're away from the people you're going to do, you're away from the family that you have up there, and he takes her away anyways. I think he's being protective, but that's Bob's take on it, okay? In what I feel fits in that cultural context. And you're trying to figure out, okay, what's going to happen? Okay, so they get down there during this time frame. If it is during Sukkot, which I think it is, there's a lot of visitors, a lot of people going around, and it's so packed because not only do you have Sukkot, but you have people traveling because Rome is making them travel. Rome's going to get them anyways. He knows the Jews are in the deal. They decide, I don't know if they're going to take advantage of this deal or not. It kind of makes sense, but nonetheless, they're going to bag everybody. but they're going to Bethlehem, and he gets there, and everything's full. There's no room at the inn, okay, so to speak, in that. But he says, but I have this. Now, we have this typical church thing that there's this KV hovel thing going on that goes, what you probably would have are sukkahs. There's a whole bunch of temporary dwellings that are up, okay? They're part of Sukkot, okay? And he said, look, I have no room in an inn. I have no room for you to stay. However, you can stay in my sukkah. That's where you can stay here and stay in my sukkah. You have a pregnant wife. It's not just going to turn you out. Can't do anything. We know everybody's coming in here. We know it's an overflow of people. You can stay in my sukkah. I don't know when the traditions inside a sukkah developed. It is traditional. It's a blessing to have some guests visit and stay with you in your sukkah, even if not overnight, but it's blessing to bring guests into your sukkah. If you ever want to understand a little bit about a sukkah and that guest interaction, go watch Ushpizin. Ushpizin, I should put that link out. I'll think about that. I'll put that on the Dusty Feet website. That's a good idea. I could put recommended videos. Just thought about that. Note to self. So, Bob, when you watch this again and you're looking at yourself, note to self, list of videos. Okay, so Ushpizin will give an understanding of how then, this is much later, mind you, this is current times, but that blessing of people staying in a sukkah. Could have been then, could have been that. So you're down, you've traveled, you're tired, you're pregnant. For those women that have had kids, just picture what Mary's going through right now, okay? And she's pregnant. So whilst in the sukkah, while down there for all of this has not happened. It's not like where I drive up to Charleston, go visit somebody for a couple hours, turn around and go home, okay? You're stuck. And then you give birth. You're not near your midwives, don't need that, but you give birth. Shepherds show up. Mackie's really cute. There's a bunch of dirty shepherds show up in their hands, and Mary and dirty. And it's like, I'm not sure that was her worry. But then again, we weren't worried about hand sanitizers and masks, right? So that's a whole nother issue. But these shepherds come and remind them of the importance of this birth. If they had any doubts, concerns, because don't forget, this is not going smooth. This is not going well. This is not comfortable. And this is one of those little reminders. This kid's special. And so the roller coaster, right? We're riding this roller coaster out. 2 years go by-ish. This is the figure out we get from Scripture. About 2 years go by. And they, for some reason, have decided to stay in stay in Bethlehem, which is interesting because it doesn't say why. She could have picked up, travel with the kid. I don't think that would be an impossible trip. I mean, you're breastfeeding, you're bringing food, you're doing all this stuff. It's really not the issue at that point. Maybe it was because he mentions when they go back about the rumor mill and all the stuff that goes with their original beginning. Maybe Joseph's thinking fresh start. Maybe Joseph's thinking we can do something here. And whatever trade he did, whatever trade that was, there's debates about trade and choice. Brad Scott, the way he breaks down Scripture and breaks down things back to the garden and agriculture and those kind of pieces, he thinks that Jesus, Yeshua's dad, they were farmers. Okay, not sure. And it would be he could take that skill, but if he had a trade, if he was a woodworker, if he was stonemason, whatever the trade was, he could take that trade and apply it somewhere else. You would have to have your tools. So maybe Joseph brought his tools. These are funny things that you don't even think about, right? In those pieces, but they're there for 2 years. Okay. And you think, okay, maybe things are going good. So for 2 years, let's make some happy assumptions and assume that things are going okay. Joseph's working. They found a place to stay, right? Their lives are going. They're obviously out of the sukkah. The sukkah's long since gone. It's a 7-day feast, right? So with an eighth, but in this feast day, and then the sukkahs get broken down, and you got to find a permanent dwelling. Well, all the census done. You pay your tax, people, and go. People are leaving town. They decide to stay. 2 years go by, and these magi show up. Okay. I was a little surprised with Mackie. It said, I love Mackie and these points, but in that scholarly side, the Bible geeky side that he tends to have, which I love, that push into the magi part of the story. Okay. That push to the magi. These guys are, because he alludes to the size of the group. They're a large contingent. Okay. They come from the east. These magi are tied to Daniel. Okay. So if you want to know about Daniel, go back and read Daniel. Okay. You'll get an idea about Daniel had a very long and prosperous life. And shall we say influential life, an eventful life, to say the least, as a prophet, as working for the government that he was in. He didn't convert the government. They didn't all become Jewish, kind of deal. He worked his bit in the government. Go read the story. It's fascinating. Okay. So these guys from Daniel's lineage of teaching, how he has perpetuated this story and passed on, they're looking for this king. They're looking. So they show up, pop into Jerusalem. And this is big. If a really nice new car shows up in a small town, it's a big deal. Okay? But a really nice new car that shows up in LA, nobody cares. Okay? It's not, trust me, in a big city, even when a big concert comes in and they got concert buses, the only people who care are people going to the concert, right? Or worse, yes, some political rally, and they got bus trains coming in. Because again, only cares if we're going political rally. This was a big group. This got the attention of the mayor of Jerusalem, right? It got the shall we say, the regional governor, okay? It got his attention. Then they turn around and say, hey, we're looking for the new king, the child that is to be the new king. Now, he is a tool of Rome. He wants to manage this area. He's living his decadent, comfortable life. And this guy comes in and says he's going to be king. If those echoes get back to Rome and he's not controlling his stuff, he doesn't get to have this cushy life anymore. So he freaks out. But he says, hey, tell me where this new king is so I can go and cheer for him too, right? And he sends them off because he knows it. So then they continue on their way and figure out that they need to go to Bethlehem. But they cut through Jerusalem on the way. It's their travel route. Look at the map, okay? So they get there and they find Mary and Joseph. This is 2 years later. And like he said, which is cool, the gifts do not equal the magi. We have this cute picture of 3 magi, and one's kneeling, one's standing, one's bending over something, and they all have the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, It's the gifts and the importance of what royalty would be with gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So another roller coaster. Now they're handed kingly gifts. These are not gifts for the poor, for the pauper. He's just a worker. Mary's just Mary. Then they get kingly gifts. So Joseph is now going, wow, we got kingly gifts. Who knows what he's thinking? Does he think cash day? Does he think this is really cool? It's a big thing. Oh, I don't know. I don't know what Joseph's thinking. But it's probably thinking something good, right? I don't think he's thinking this is really bad that we've gotten these. So he's like, our lives going to be a little different now. Things are going to be a little different in the Joseph Mary household. They don't even have last names to go with, like we'd say the Warren household, right? The Joseph Mary household, and things are going to get better. Okay. And he gets these gifts. And then almost overnight, right, they get the news that X miles away, Jerusalem and there are not far away. And the Magi tell them, the angel, you have to leave. They're coming for your baby. You have to leave. He packs up what he has to pack up, grabs his bride and his newly born, it's just 2-year-old child, a 2-year-old. Okay, not in a car, but on a horse or a donkey or something, and starts the trek to Egypt, okay, and flee because they're looking for your baby. Now, I'm going to switch scenes to side screen, so don't freak out if I move over to here, because I'm going to freak out so we can pull up some graphics. We're going to take a look at a few things here. So here's the first one, and this is that map area. Now, I know it's really tiny. It's not meant for you detailed to look at. It's more like just to consider, okay? So the blue in the far corner up that blue line near that sea, okay, that's where Jerusalem/Bethlehem is, okay? That's where they start, okay? Like Mackie says, when they left, they went to Egypt. There's a good chance they went to Alexandria, because Alexandria has a Jewish community there, very large Jewish community, and it ends up being a very powerful Jewish community later on down the road when we get into the battle between Constantinople and Alexandria in our church development, church history, that has some very tumultuous times between 300 and 400 AD. Okay, so Alexandria is an important place. But they go to Egypt. Now, this isn't just one of those quick trips. Now, usually there, I know this works with us in the South, at least places I've been, which have been fortunate. You'll be down some roads, and then you'll find out through history or a little read or trail that this was the original trail that the carts, wagons, trade was down these routes, okay, which was cool. And this is where those trade routes were. So carts, horse, deal, cotton, whatever they did. So here, this might be a trade route. They could go through the desert, that up part, but that's deserty. This has water around its ways and that kind of stuff. They could have gone to the coast and then skirted the coast. That's not impossible either. But just for fun, let's use the dotted line that's there. That little blue line's, believe it or not, it's a big bunch of dots. Okay. So that line is 100. That line, that little white square, which I know you can't read unless you're zooming in on your screen. Okay. It says 181 hours. Did Google had it walk it, right? So the Google walk says if you're walking this, it takes 181 hours. 181 hours. If you walked 8 hours a day, so you traveled 8 hours a day, that's movement, right? Not because you're going to walk and you're going to rest, you're going to walk and you're going to rest, you're going to walk and you're going to set up somewhere to sleep. You're going to try to find a place that's safe. Are you making a tent? Are you staying in a town? Are you doing whatever you're doing? 8 hours a day. Okay. It's going to take you over 22 days. So it could easily be a month trip to Alexandria. It takes him a month just to get to a safe place. Now, the nice part is that he's taken care of that for 24 hours, maybe he thought, I'm in the money, and all of a sudden he realizes, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have these gifts. Hey, this is going to get us, going to take care of us, at least for this fleeing to Egypt. while you're on this trip, Mackie alludes to it. I don't know if she gets the news, but it's pointed that he says it. And it's deals that she finds out that they were coming to kill your baby, and they killed those babies 2 years and under in that community. He did the math, figured out, he thinks with demographic, blah, 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 anywhere 25 to 50. I've heard numbers as high as 75 to 100. 25, 100 babies. Okay. Now go more personal than that. Go down one layer. Mom and kids get together in the town square for their kids to play. They're 2-year-olds. They're playing together. You know some of these people. You know these women. You know them. And their babies are killed. You have no time to tell them. This is on Mary's heart. This is what Mary and Joseph could know. They would eventually know the whole story, even if they're not finding out on that trip. Trust me, they're going to know that happened. That's going to get out. This roller coaster is a nightmare. They get to Egypt. They live in Egypt. Mary and Joseph will never be the same. Think about it. This is not this fairy tale. Your son's the savior of the world, and you're going to live a cush life somewhere and do that. This is a nightmare beginning. This is a test beginning. This is the parents are tested. Their willingness to listen, their willingness to trust, and then whoever they rely on in the community in Alexandria. And they do such a amazing job of making it through that. And then there's a bunch we don't know, right? Then we know nothing until it says they go back to Nazareth, and then we get a trip to Jerusalem when he's 12. That's it. We don't even have time frames of those. We just know that it was after Herod number 1 had died. His son ends up taking his place. It's the nightmare. But enough where the angel says, the guy that wanted to kill you is gone. Travel back. The messenger says it's time to go home. Okay? And you wonder, okay, so Joseph decided, they in this deal, he makes this allusion, Mackie talks about that, he would go to Bethlehem, go back to where they were, before this whole nightmare with this gets up. And you realize that guy is right there, and he's as bad as the son is as bad as his dad. And he realizes, man, I can't even give a sniff at this, so I have to go back to Nazareth. I have to go back to, as Mackie put it, the rumor mill. And everything that goes with that. And it hit me. And I'm like, oh, and you thought you'd escaped it. And this isn't like you called them. This isn't like you were calling them going, oh, we're in Alexandria. We're going to be here for a while. Plane's delayed. We got some deal and we'll show up when we show up. And you didn't write letters. Common people did not just write letters, put a postage stamp on it and say, oh, let's make the trek from Alexandria there and make sure this gets to the third hut on the right by the well. They just show back up in Nazareth. You've been gone. The rumor mill has spread. That story has been told down south. That gets spread around the land, and you show up back in Nazareth. It's more story and more time, and it's Nazareth. We'll talk about Sticktown in a bit. But like Matthew says, like Mackie talks about Matthew is drawing the audience in. He's drawing them into this story. Remember, this is a spoken story. This is, like I talked about earlier, this is, the words are coming out and they're hearing it. So the story's getting done, and then all of a sudden they get this click because the story pattern shows up. we're getting to we're going to the Egypt pattern where he says, as the prophet, right? And he quotes Hosea as, and this is where he gets this point. The interesting part that he talked about the prophets too was good. They go, so you go back and the footnotes there, if you're a Schofield Bible reader, you got to deal a little live, it says you go to Hosea, and you go, it's not one of the word for word things, right? It doesn't work out. He said, for the 5 of you in there that were interested, and he stretches this point. He says, go back, find out. So this is the beginning part on this. So he said, okay. So when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me. They sacrificed to the Baals, and they burned incense to images. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms, but they did not realize it was I who healed them. Taking them by the arms, I picture them as little kids, when you grab little hands and you're, teach them how to walk. Whereas I'm the one that's been taking care of you all along. But he calls out of Egypt. Okay, now this repetition pattern is starting to come out, and they've heard the Egypt story their whole lives. Their whole lives, they've heard the Egypt story. And Matthew starts to throw out the Egypt story, and you go, okay. The journey to Egypt. Oppressive king kills children. Okay. Remember, in this side, there's a subplot going on that's going to show up later. That is something they've heard, is that there's a prophet likened unto Moses, again, from the prophets. There's some of the Messiah stuff coming out. So we have this. On top of that, journey to Egypt, oppressive king kills, God's son called out of Egypt. And they're going to hear this word. The word, it's funny, you read it in English, and actually they might have pulled that from a Greek, okay? The Hebrew Matthew, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, the link's there. I meant to make sure, I think the Hebrew Matthew link is in the website. Note to self again, note to self, put the Hebrew Matthew link up. It's not there, and make sure it's on the website. Great, okay. That he's speaking Hebrew to a Hebrew audience. This is Matthew's target audience. He has an agenda and he has a group, okay? Speaking Hebrew. So they're hearing these repetition patterns. They're going 40 years, da-da-da, okay? And in this story, don't forget he's telling the backstory. This is all going in, right? We have Yeshua's baptism in the Jordan, 40 days in the wilderness as this story unfolds, and they're getting... This is the words that hit me when Mackie said that. And I'm putting myself in the listening audience's shoes, and I go, because this is what they're looking for. He's one of us. He is part of us. And it hit me that that's important. He's one of us. I can identify with this because my whole life I've heard nothing but these stories. And we're in the middle of this oppression anyways. Rome is in, life sucks in the land of Israel at this time. And Egypt, note, good for notes. Where we are. Okay. And Mackie says, and he uses this phrase, which was good, like this. He says, Mackie used a term that I liked. He said, bringing the loose threads together. So he has these pieces, these loose threads in a tapestry. He's bringing them together. He's pulling them together. Okay. There was a amusement park I used to go to as a kid, Knott's Berry Farm. Mom, Dad, Jimmy, does Knott's Berry Farm even exist anymore? I don't know. It was a more of a Western-based setup, but it was also very crafty. And there were certain areas in the amusement park, this was probably one of those deals where that interested the parents. the kids would go ride the rides. They had some cool rides and did all that stuff. And the artisan areas where they go see, and they would have blacksmiths and leather workers and glass blowers. Oh, I love watching the glass blowers. Glass blowers were so cool to me. They could blow with the heat. It was so cool. Okay. And then they would have the people with the loom, and they'd be making their threads to put in the loom. So they're hooking these threads and they're pulling these threads out. Okay. And that brought me to this piece. And I looked at this and I pulled this up. I was looking for some graphics. And this came up. And this is what hit me. The typical loom that we see where they got the pattern, and you have to know what the pattern is that you're making as you're going. Okay. So follow me on this if this works. Okay. If this works. The strings are time and life. Okay. Like X and Y, right? And the picture underneath is God's picture, the Lamb of God. Okay. We'll use this, but play with this, that the picture behind is God's eventual picture. When you're a thread, you don't see it. You can't see the picture. You barely know your color. You might know your color. Woohoo! I'm a blue thread. I'm a blue thread. Today I'm a blue thread. Okay. So now, if you remember when they would do the threads, we would see in Charleston, and we'd go to the Middleton plantation, could see the lady do the same deal. She has her pile of wool, and it can be dyed wool or what. So she's got her wool, and then she's taking these clumps of wool and feeding and making it's starting to twist, starting to get it. Then as it goes through the spinning wheel, it tightens the wool to make it into a thread. Okay, that's eventually the threads you're looking at in this picture, but it comes from that. So maybe that's that whole our sheep whole thing, that's our contribution to the tapestry of God is our wool, right? Our willingness to give up ourselves and of ourselves. That's interesting thought. And belief that they're having our best interest in mind when the shepherd shears us, and our contribution to the community, to the nation we would serve, because of not to ourselves, but to the people that we would serve. Ooh, that just gets bigger. I hadn't thought about that either. Anyways, okay. So in this deal, as this goes through, I'm not the blue thread. I'm a blue thread. I am included in the blue thread. And the multi-threads in this multi-tapestry, I'm part of that. I can choose not to be. I can choose not to be part of God's deal. If I believe that is a pattern that says no matter what choice I make, God's a puppeteer. And he's going to be marionette, which means my choice doesn't matter at all. That my choice serves... whatever choice I make is the choice, because it can't be anything else, because it's been predestined that's my call. Scripture doesn't talk like that, and I have a challenge with that, which means I have a choice. The picture will play out. Am I going to be in it or not is the question. The picture will play out. Am I going to be one of those threads, or am I going to say, I don't want to be part of that picture? I want to be part of something else. God says, okay, go jump on his loom. And you're not on my loom. Then when his will, that picture will eventually play out. Your thread's not in it. That's a nightmare. Okay. And I think that's hell. I think hell is not being in God's tapestry. So when he's finished and the tapestry's done, and this is his wall, anything that isn't part of that tapestry gets pushed out. It doesn't get to be in his place. Like Mackie talks about, hell is, I will honor your choice, but I can't have that in my future. And you get pushed aside. That not being in God's tapestry, that's hell. Non-existence, that's hell. Okay. And how that plays out. And I loved how he thought of this tapestry and the loose strings. Okay, so Matthew. Oh, okay. Here we go. Okay, so now we get into here. So in the prophets, we get into the Nazarene. Okay, and I loved. Okay, I loved this part. I did. Sometimes we think that the English, whatever we say, this is truth and this is what it is, and it says what it says, so this is what it is. And I go, you really might, at least if you're going to take that stance, at least do it with the original language. So at least you can say, this is what it says. Okay, at least you can stick there. Then your willingness to say, okay, say it's Hebrew, and I'm game with that. In other words, I love that. So you say Hebrew, okay. Then you go, okay, so it's Hebrew. So the original Hebrew for this original part was Paleo. We'll do a little Hebrew time and talk about how the language has developed over time, right? Just like all language, but this how this language had developed from the pictograph forms, the original Hebrew pictograph, to how those pictographs have come into the structure as we know Hebrew today. And then when we get the Hebrew that was developed from the pictograph to the caricature, from those points, we don't get the vowel points in those until the Masoretic text, because they start to realize that this story is going to be spread out further than the people that know how to speak the language. Remember, talked about that scripture is meant to be heard. It's oral. It's the choice of word. So the Masoretic text puts vowel points in there so they're pronounced the way, because Hebrew texts are all consonants. And their text can mean a number or a word, depending how it's used. Then its language, that's how it sets in the sentence, is different, especially with English. You have to rearrange Hebrew you have to take the Hebrew and then figure out those points, how I would rearrange them to give me an English sentence. You already have problems there. So it's just something that it's very important that we need to be aware of. And so inside of this, Matthew doesn't have this problem. Matthew does not have this problem. This is our problem. This is our 21st century problem. It's not Matthew's. Matthew was sitting to an audience and he starts talking about Yeshua's early beginnings. And there was a point where somebody says, what good can come from? In my area in Charleston for years, there was an area that this was, and we lived there for a little bit when I was at the weapons station. I was in the Air Force, but I was living on the Navy side. Okay, and we live in a little town called Goose Creek that's there. And if you were from this area, I could hear somebody saying that exact same phrase, what good could come from Goose Creek? Okay, this phrase hit me as very real. What good could come from? But in this particular part, where we're getting to this, he says, so this branch stick piece, and I love this because when he says from the prophets, and you go to look, and he says, go do a search. Do this search, do the simple Bible geek search, just do the word search for Nazareth in the Old Testament, any prophecy you're going to deal, and you realize it's not there. Okay? So Matthew, interesting, is decided to be scholarly. At some way, shape, proclivity, don't know where his points, how well he knew Torah. It's an interesting point versus, say, Peter's renditions and how he goes and those kind of deals and the fun that they had, James and John, and they're arguing and bickering. Those are all recorded incidences. So they're very brutally honest about themselves in this story. But we have this Nazareth. So how we get from Nazareth to Nazareth, we're going from Hebrew to Greek. The meaning is the name of a town, okay? Just is the name of a town, right? Then you have Netzer, branch or stick. So then you read Isaiah. Again, they're hearing this, right? This phrase comes up and he says, a shoot will come up from the branch of Jesse and from his roots, from the stump of Jesse, and from his roots, a branch will bear fruit. Now, you and I are looking back and thinking, oh, fruit bearing, da 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 da. Okay, we're hearing, we already know more of the story than they know at this point. But they're getting there, right? But will bear fruit, okay? So then Isaiah says, for he grew up like a young branch, like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, no great appearance to attract us to him. He was despised and forsaken by others, a man of sorrow, familiar with grief. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. If you wanted to read the end, the spoiler synopsis for Yeshua's, for Jesus's life, this is the synopsis, right? He gets recognized and then squashed, sent away to Egypt for fear of his life. I mean, why didn't God just kill Herod and make Jerusalem? But these people, again, this is their own fear, their insecurities. God he honors other people's choices. I can do things around that. Don't forget, Joseph and Mary still had to listen. It didn't say he magically transported them. It didn't say that, that message bore him. He had to listen. He gave them the resources, but they had to listen. And they obeyed. And it saved them. And then they get to Egypt. And that's a whole community. Wouldn't you I would love to know the stories, to go back with those people that got to know Mary and Joseph, got to know Jesus for this short period of time. Like he said, no, Jesus probably pooped and peed like the rest of the kids and played and got skinned his knees and did his deal. He didn't float around the kids and was no boo-boos, right? But I wonder if they realized if he was special. I wonder if Mary and Joseph shared the story. Were they quiet-lipped? Did they not tell anybody? Was there a fear? Or did they, you want to share, oh, my son's the savior of the world. I know the deal, but this is a blessed child. God has anointed this child. This is a special child. And maybe, but nothing was going to pop out and do this, but you knew of him. Years go by. This is a Jewish community that ends up being a strong religious community in Alexandria. And this story gets back. Does that come back as we knew where he was when he was here? That's one of those interesting points to ponder in this Nazareth story. But they're hearing this. They're hearing twig, branch, snap, snap. And then they get what good come out of Nazareth. And they go, he's one of us. And we were, in our beginnings, our humble beginnings, just a people. We were just Abraham to start. And then we became something. He's one of us. Those are the words that echoed in my head. And it still echoes in my head. Is He's one of us. Jesus comes, and this is the genesis of his beginning. It's not a fairy tale beginning. It's not a once upon a time fairy tale stuff. It's not. This is more like a Brothers Grimm fairy tale. It is. This is a Brothers Grimm treat. This is because this is not the way you want to start. These are the formative years of Jesus, and he's uprooted, traveling, spent more time on a horse than most of us. And Matthew was starting to draw in his audience the agenda that he has. You're sitting there and you're almost like you're on the edge of the seat. You're so you're starting to get, he's already got you. At the very beginning of his story, this is the thing that he wrote. He wants his story told. He's drawing you in. So this is this roller coaster, right? We're on this roller coaster. In 2 weeks, we hit the temptation. Roller coaster, okay? Because we go from the beginning where he goes and has the immersion with John in the Jordan, that whole Jordan and then the wilderness scenario. So we're getting to that part in the story, right? Where we have his Jordan experience, where as this story continues along, here comes the next elements in that story, the Jordan wilderness part. This part we're getting from Mary and Joseph. Okay? When Matthew is sharing this part of the story, this part he's getting from Mary and Joseph. Jesus can't tell him this part of the story. Please don't get in that he has the memory and goes back and edit. Please don't go there. Okay? He gets the information from there. Okay? What we get from Matthew later, which is fascinating to me on this next one, which I love, when we get to the temptation, that can only come from Jesus, can only come from Yeshua. I think that's cool. So again, he's getting the people, and he's, okay, here's the stuff, I got this, and I get to hear it, got this, and then they get to them, right? Because Matthew's realized in the crowd that these guys haven't even come to group yet. We're not there yet. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. So as this story develops, and we're going to look forward to that. We're going to enjoy that one. I hope to get a guest on that because it'd be fun to talk about. So I'm working on that so that we can have somebody that's available. Because that temptation, that topic, and how that all unfolds and things are, and the onion layers that get peeled back from that are brilliant. So they're big points. And that's that. Okay. So that's the beginning of the genesis of Jesus, right? This is really, I guess you'd have to say at this point that to say we're going from Genesis to Exodus, right? We're making that transition, right? Because I'll vote that we get this is the Genesis, the beginning, and then when we get the Egypt, when we get the Jordan wilderness scenario set up, we're into the next setup, okay? So in this setup, we've got out the Genesis of Jesus. We're now getting into the Exodus of Jesus, right? We'll just roll with that for a while, okay? And we'll see where this goes, okay? It'll be fun. Next week is Red String. I'm looking forward to it. My brother Jim Warren will be back. Got some Red String topic. Should be fun. We're still trying to figure out because there's a couple things hanging. That's going to be good. You're going to like those. Okay. And we have Red String. 2 weeks. We have our next story. Yep. Hear that beep? Yeah, thank you. So the video and web links for this video down in the description. Okay. I might even have the Hebrew Matthew still in there. And so anything is to do with those clips we've had, anything we've covered here is there. The DustyFeet.com, that's where the next week's link is going to be. Okay. It always is for this homework. So we got the homework. This next one is the testing Jesus in the wilderness. That's part 3 of his series, Mackie's. Okay. That'll be on that website. All that info that's there. So go there, check out the stuff, enjoy your week, have a wonderful upcoming Shabbat, and we will see you next week with a red string on the Dusty Feet.